The last few recruiting classes may have lacked star power, but this year's Peach Jam proves that streak is coming to an end.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoops show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. That gentleman over there is Isaac Shade. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, every single day here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. I want to thank all of you who made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Special shout out to those everyday listeners, and a special shout out to those of you who are hanging out with us in our Discord channel. If you want to join us, there's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Click that link, come hang out with us, talking college hoops 24/7 over there. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. It's the dog days of summer. The sports are not sporting the way we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Isaac. We got a couple of different topics today. We're going to talk Peach Jam. Championship game took place on Sunday. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the super star-studded classes that we got coming up in 25 and 26. Peach Jam really put that on full display. We're going to talk about some of the big names, why we're excited about the future of college basketball with these high school classes. We're also going to talk Oklahoma Sooners basketball. We're going to talk about Jeremiah Fears, who is decommitted from Illinois, will join Oklahoma this upcoming season. Big time get late in the recruiting cycle for Porter Moser. We're also going to take a look at this new look roster for the Sooners, and they're moving into the SEC, what that might look like for them, all that to close out the show. But Isaac, let's start with the battle we saw on Sunday morning West Coast time. I guess it's probably afternoon, your time over there.
Yeah.
But we had the Nightrydas Elite against the Oakland Soldiers, AJ Dybantsa. We saw the Boozer twins. Incredible, exciting, high-level basketball. Really emphasizes how good of shape this sport is going to be in the next couple of years. What were your thoughts on this game?
Well, Andy, absolutely. The stars were on display. Just like, let's say the top 5 players in this game were 2025's number 1, 2, 4, and 17 players. And Stokes is number 2 in the class of 26. So, Andy, absolutely electric players. And the dudes stepped up like you need them to. What's interesting, we're talking about it at the general big picture level. Dybantsa is absolutely the dude in everything that we expect him to be. Took over this game in the third quarter at Peach Jam. For those who are only tuned in typically to college basketball, high school we get quarters. Nightrydas Elite is a team that's been together for a while. They have now won in back-to-back years the 15U Peach Jam, the 16U Peach Jam, and now the 17U Peach Jam. First to ever do that. They are a complete team, and they did a great job early of really shutting down Dybantsa, but then he just took over and his offensive star went off. But what I love, Andy, in particular about Cayden Boozer is his just everythingness that he does is so high level and so elite and contributes to winning in a ton of games. And that's not to take anything away from Dybantsa at all. I just want to highlight where they are both so wildly strong. Dybantsa has this offensive bag that is insanely deep. So that alone is awesome. But watching him, Andy, he knows when to use everything, right? Like wherever somebody stops him, it's like, oh, if I got to use my mid-range float game, I can do that. If I need to pull up, I can do that. He's elite from the free throw line, all this stuff. But then you look at Cayden Boozer's stat line from this game, and it's a microcosm of everything he does. 19 points, 7 of 8 from the field, 1 of 1 from the three-point line, 4 of 4 from the free throw line, 10 boards, 5 assists, and 3 blocks. And he just lets the game come to him. And there's some questions sometimes about, can he be the dude? And when he needed to be, he absolutely can be. There's other names and we can talk about, but these are the 2 guys at the tip top of this thing, obviously. And we want to get into some of the others, but I was just so impressed by both guys in this game.
Yeah, really incredible performances. I mean, you look at Dybantsa's line and you're going to see 25 points on 26 field goal attempts. And that's not going to necessarily look great, but it's not like he was chucking and missing a bunch of threes. He went 2 of 7 from the 3-point line. And I think he's a player who you want the ball in his hands. You want him taking a lot of shots. Sure, he's going to have some games where he misses a handful of shots like he did in this game, but he contributed defensively. And like you said, the versatility offensively, he's got a wide variety of moves. He's got the basketball IQ to know when to pull up, when to keep attacking, when to try to draw contact, get to the free throw line, like just an advanced feel and maturity for the game that you don't often see from younger freshmen. That's the reason, or younger high school students. That's the reason that he is, at the level that he is. That's the reason he's so highly coveted, not just the raw talent and the athleticism, but the maturity, the just basketball IQ that he possesses. But I think the Boozers have to be the story here. Cam Boozer, like you say, missed one shot. He was 1 point off from being 20, 10, and 5 on 7 of 8 shooting, on a perfect line from the free throw line, while also adding 3 blocks, 20, 10, and 5. Again, 19 technically, but 1 point off from 20, 10, 5, and 3.
We're rounding up today, Andy. We're rounding up.
Yeah, we're rounding up. Like just an extremely, just the kind of performance we have seen from him. The reason that this team is winning, and they won at 15U, they won at 16U, they won at 17U, and Cayden Boozer is not the level of prospect as his brother, and he didn't have quite as good of a game, 8 points on 4 of 10 shooting, but he contributes 7 rebounds. He contributes 7 assists. He contributes a steal. Like, he is still somebody whose versatility, whose ability to impact the game in multiple different ways showed out. And being teammates, being on a team with this many talented players and being able to still carve out a winning role, being able to still find ways to impact the game, that's going to help serve him at the future level, not just in college, but potentially at the NBA level as well, where most players don't become, ball first superstar options. Dybantsa probably will, but most of the rest of the players probably won't. And for those players, you want to be able to prove that you can impact winning without necessarily needing 20 shots a game or the ball in your hand a whole bunch of times. And really both Boozers have demonstrated that throughout their high school careers. And I think will continue to demonstrate that they can be at least in Cameron's case, he can be a score first, ball dominant option, but he can also do other things. And I think being on this talented roster for the last couple of years has helped accelerate their game and should allow them to be very successful at the rest of their stops in their basketball careers.
And it's funny, I've liked to say along the way about Cayden Boozer that it's like, while he, like you said, is not the prospect his brother is, he's still number 17 in this class.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be a great field general, a great lead, legit point guard for whoever gets him. I know that they've said they're not necessarily a package deal, but I think it's just going to make sense for them to go somewhere together, whether it is staying down in South Florida and going to Miami or coming up to Duke to follow what their dad did. It's going to be a lot of fun. Andy, we got to make sure we talk about Caleb Wilson as well. We got to make sure we talk about Tyran Stokes. Wilson, I was really impressed. Like, he's just so long and gangly, Andy. 8 points, 4 of 9 shooting, 3 boards, 3 assists. But homie had 6 blocks. And, I mean, it was just a lot of that was backside cleanup kind of stuff. Tyran Stokes, who's only 16, playing in this game at a high level. It took him a little bit to settle in. The commentators were talking before the game about how much his offensive game has grown, how much his skill set has grown beyond just the raw natural ability he has. And I watched him put it on display multiple times, just like step arounds, stutter steps, pull-ups, other things that just he hasn't had before. But then let's not forget that he still has the ability. Like, there was this transition dunk he had, Andy, in the second quarter that folks, if you watch the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just rose up through contact and threw it down. This dude is a rising junior, so he's got 2 more years to just keep growing and evolving. And I cannot wait to see what happens. And all those big names, Andy, we haven't even talked about. I was really impressed by Dante Allen. I was really impressed. Caleb Gaskins comes off the bench for Nightrydas. And so just so much absurd talent. And let's just full circle it back to your first point. The 25 class is so insanely talented, and 20 and at a star level as well. 26 has a bunch of dudes as well. Yeah, this game's in good hands.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you talk about, like, 24 is going to be a great class as well. We obviously haven't seen them in action yet outside of, we've seen some of the guys in the Olympic stuff with VJ Edgecombe and Cooper Flagg and others. But I think we're looking at a really strong 24 class coming off of what was not a particularly strong 23 class. 25 looks like it's full of superstars. 26 looks to be in great shape. We'll see if reclasses change some of that, maybe change some of the predict how we're predicting that class going forward. But ultimately, the next couple of years are going to be chock full of some elite freshmen, some high level, likely one and dones in many cases, but it'll be really interesting to see how these classes shake out, because there's a lot of superstar or high level talent joining college basketball in the next 2 to 3 years. And it's going to be really fun to see how it gets spread out, where they end up going, and how much they impact the game in the next few years.
Yeah. Like, there's legitimate talk that Dybantsa could go to BYU. How fun would that be? That'd be
that's
wild.
Crazy fun.
I mean, what are we doing? Now, also, just real quick before we transition, folks, keep your eyes on recruiting news these next couple days and weeks, because a lot of these guys have said, once Peach Jam is done, now I'm going to start talking about scheduling visits or committing or other things like that. So there should be a firestorm of news coming out. Andy, Jeremiah Fears reclasses to 24, not going to Illinois anymore. He's going to join Porter Moser's Oklahoma Sooners as they transition into the SEC. We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. We love sports so much, Andy and I do. We were just talking before we hopped on about the Olympics and baseball and all sorts of stuff going on. We just never want the sports to stop. But here in these dog days of summer, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But good news, FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you got to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. We're about to talk about Oklahoma in just a second. We looked up their national championship odds for this one, and Andy, they are long. Plus 15,000 for Oklahoma to win the national championship. So if you want to get in on some of that long action, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for joining us today on Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. And right now, your team is the Oklahoma Sooners. Make sure to check out Locked On Sooners, hosted by our buddy John Williams. Does a great job hosting that show. Andy, random tidbit. I don't know if I've ever told you this. Norman's like 3.5 hours from where I live. John's like cousin or brother-in-law or something goes to my church. It's the most random thing. How about that? Anyway. Oklahoma lands Jeremiah Fears. He reclasses to 2024, had decommitted from Illinois, and so now is moving from the Big Ten to the SEC, not the Big 12. Remember, Oklahoma is SEC. I'm telling myself that as much as I'm telling all of you listening and watching. Andy, I know that you recently wrote about Oklahoma for USA Today and all your great writing that you do. Why don't you fill us in a little bit on the Fears commitment?
Yeah, Jeremiah Fears decommitted from Illinois a while back. And at the time, Oklahoma immediately kind of emerged as a potential landing spot. There was a handful of other schools that were in the mix as well. And a large part of the conversation was whether he was going to reclassify or not. There was a lot of expectation that that was something that he wanted to do. Ultimately, that ends up becoming the reality. Fears, the younger brother of Jeremy Fears, who plays at Michigan State, did not stay in the Big Ten, did not want to compete against his brother, did not want to compete on the same team as his brother at Michigan State. So now he heads into the SEC, like we said, at Oklahoma. He was the 37th ranked player in the 2025 class as of this recording. He has not been updated on 24/7 Sports or On3 or other recruiting services in terms of where they're going to slot him in the 2024 recruiting class, but it is safe to say he is going to be a highly regarded player in the 2024 recruiting class. It is certainly safe to say he's going to be the best incoming freshman for Porter Moser. They do have 3 freshmen. The other 2 are outside of the top 125, again, using 24/7 Sports as rankings. This is a huge get for Porter Moser and Oklahoma. And Fears talked about his decision to go there. He said, quote, "I love their staff. I love their strength coach. They have NBA experience. Coach Moser is big development guy, a very successful coach, a great person and a family man. This is a great opportunity for me at Oklahoma. And I know the SEC will be tough. I am ready to work and get on campus." Yeah. And it's just an exciting new opportunity for him. It's an exciting opportunity for Porter Moser and Oklahoma, because they're a team that has had to pretty much replace their entire backcourt. And Fears is now going to be in that mix alongside a couple other transfers coming into the program. Not a lot of returners at that position. They have 8 newcomers between the 5 transfers, 3 freshmen. They have a bunch of guys departing. So we're looking at an Oklahoma team that is coached by the same man, but entering a new conference with a very new roster. And I'm very intrigued, cautiously optimistic, but also I'm not 100% sold that this roster is necessarily better. I think I like the players they're bringing in. I like some of the transfers. I certainly like Fears coming into the mix. He's going to be a little raw. Again, he just made the decision to reclassify. So up until a few days ago, the expectation was that he would be entering his senior season of high school, and now he is going to be potentially expected to carry a role for this team right away. So it'll be interesting to see whether he adjusts to that. They do got some veteran guards coming in the transfer portal. They got Duke Miles from High Point. They have Kobe Elvis from Dayton. They have Jadon Jones from Long Beach State. He's more of a 2 guard than a point guard, but they got some guys coming in who I think can help fill some of those roles of guys departed, like Uzan, who goes to Houston, like Javion McCollum, who transfers to Georgia Tech. Rivaldo Soares is out of eligibility. I think that this is going to be a potentially challenging year, especially early on, with how much new talent Porter Moser is working with. But once this team gets going, I'm very curious to see how they can do in the SEC.
Yeah, and this is great. I mean, let's just Fears. Let me talk about him. Like, I love him coming to this team. I was surprised because he's from Joliet, Illinois, up by Chicago-ish, right? Isn't that where that is?
Yeah.
And so I was surprised that he was wanting to get out like that, and especially with his brother at Michigan State, decommitting from Illinois. But, I mean, it's this day and age.
Yeah,
it's just, who knows? There's just so many different interests and things pulling at these dudes. I think this is a great get. I've only watched like a little bit of Fears. I haven't watched like any full games of his, just highlights. But from reading like from Adam Finkelstein about him from 247 Sports, I'm really encouraged by this for Oklahoma, because he's a guy that a scoring guard, like works really well with the ball in his hands. And so if he can get in and going, because I know we're talking about this, right? Like late July at this point. And so it is a late edition. It makes me think of like a Johnny Furphy last year committing to Kansas on August 3rd. And so I think that's the crux of this is can he get ready to go and up to speed quickly? And if so, can be a nice piece for an Oklahoma backcourt that, as you said, is looking for consistency and looking for guys to step in and step up. No reason that he couldn't do that, especially given everything you laid out about who is coming in. So I don't know if you had to project like his role or minutes or things like that, Andy, and just kind of asking off the cuff there, what sort of impact do you think he could have on this Sooners roster?
Yeah, I think the fact that they brought in a couple of guys who have a history of being point guards. They bring it. Duke Miles averaged 3.5 assists per game last year at High Point. He also averaged 17.5 points, but he is somebody who has been that facilitator. He started his career at Troy, so he's played at multiple spots. This is his first step at the high major level, but he is a point guard. Kobe Elvis is coming over from Dayton. He averaged 3.5 assists per game last year for the Flyers, so he's somebody who has been a distributor, a facilitator at a high level in the A-10. Again, it's not the SEC, but it is still somebody who has experience. He's only got 1 year of eligibility remaining. Miles has 2. They also get Bryson Gooding, who's coming over from Fairfield. He's got 1 year left. A lot of guards coming into this program who have been in college for 2, 3, in some cases 4 years. So I think that that's going to help Fears kind of acclimate quicker. But at the end of the day, these guys may all have experience, but they have no experience playing together. So it's going to be really interesting to see how does Moser fit all these pieces. They got some really good floor spacing. Gooding shot 47% last year from 3. So they have some floor spacing. They have some scoring. They have some facilitators. but none of them have played together. My guess is Fears is coming off the bench this season, and he's probably going to see his playing time increase as the year goes on. That's not a particularly bold prediction about a freshman who is reclassifying, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, if Fears is the best guard on this team, but I'd be very surprised if he starts the season as the best guard on the team. If that happens, it's one of two reasons. He's a lot better than we think that he is, and he's instantly ready to contribute, or the other guards on this team aren't necessarily ready for SEC competition. So if Fears is their guy from day one, it's either really good or really bad for Moser and the Sooners.
Yeah, that's a great take, Andy, because and Fears himself is not really a floor spacer, right? Like that's not where he shines, and so we're not expecting that. I also love, let's mention that he's got Team USA experience, won a gold medal this year at the FIBA Men's Under 18 AmeriCorps, so that's good. Averaged in that 6.5 points, 2.7 boards, 2.8 assists, and 3 steals a game, and playing just 12 minutes to do that. So yeah, it's going to be fun and interesting to watch what he brings to this team as they transition to the SEC, Andy.
Yeah, that's the big thing here. You know, we talk about this new roster all we want, and there's some excitement about it. But at the end of the day, you may think this team's out of the Big 12. Hooray, good news for them. The Big 12 is a great, elite, deep, fantastic college basketball conference. But is this new look roster, are they going to find things any easier in the SEC? We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, Isaac, closing out the show, continuing our conversation here on the Oklahoma Sooners. Like you said, to start the last segment, if you want to hear more about Oklahoma, their transition to the SEC, you want to hear some basketball talk or some football talk or some softball talk, it is an incredible softball program. Definitely check out Locked On Sooners. John Williams, fantastic job covering all aspects of that program, especially now as they move into the SEC. But Isaac, I want to talk about Oklahoma's what happened last year. I want to talk about them getting into the SEC too, but last year's team didn't make the NCAA tournament, and that's not incredibly like Oklahoma hasn't been a consistent NCAA tournament team, but there was times last year around the turn of the year, early January, where it would have been pretty surprising if you told people that Oklahoma was not going to make the NCAA tournament. They started the year 10-0. They ended up losing to North Carolina in the Jumpman Invitational, but then they got all the way up to 13-1. That included a win over Iowa, a win over Providence, a win over Arkansas, which looked better at the time than it ultimately ended up being, a win over Iowa State, which is an incredible win. They were 13-1 with those victories. They looked smooth sailing, but things did not go well after that. They finished the season, their last 18 games, they went 7-11. They lost to TCU in the first Big 12 tournament game. They finished the year 20-12, but only 8-10 in the Big 12. And because they had a very not competitive non-conference schedule, 274th ranked schedule in the non-conference, that combined with the weak record in the Big 12 led to them not making the NCAA tournament. We have talked about the Big 12 in particular and their tendency to have a lot of their team schedule fairly weak non-conference schedules. And I don't think the Big 12 is dictating that they do that, but they seem to have some kind of agreement. We did TCU's schedule last year, Iowa State's schedule last year, now Oklahoma's schedule last year. We're all pretty weak. And there's an advantage to it. Certainly, we know that they're manipulating the net and that it works and that it helped these teams kind of be able to rack up quad one wins or quad one losses against each other. But if you're a team like Oklahoma, it kind of killed them. Like they won 20 games last year and they did not make the NCAA tournament. And part of it was that non-conference schedule. I'm curious, and we can talk a little bit about what their current schedule is going to be for this upcoming year, but it certainly didn't seem like it did them any favors last year.
Yeah. I mean, because the thing is, you do that and then you got to win those games and you got to be at least 500 in the Big 12. And we see teams doing that in the Big 12 in this day and age, going 500 and making the NCAA tournament. Yeah. But to go, multiple games below 500 like that, that's just a bridge too far, I think is the phrase, Andy, there, where it's just like, in the way they just performed in that final 18 games that you talk about, it's almost like they Clemsoned a little bit there. And as we've seen, that doesn't bode well. And I know the committee doesn't anymore look at like what have you done for me lately? Right. Like most recent 10 games isn't a thing, but Andy, can we be honest? As a human, you can't help but have some recency bias. Even if we're saying we're not going to look at that, it's in your head. Every time I watch Oklahoma lately, they don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that has to play into it, even if it's subconscious. And so I guess that's kind of the nice thing about losing so many guys is now if you're Porter Moser, you just scrap it.
Yeah.
To use a Ted Lasso term, you goldfish it, and then you just move on. And that I think it helps as we talk about now transitioning into the SEC. It's like, hey, that's dead and done and gone and behind us. Who are we going to be and what are we going to do now? Like, I think you challenge the guys that are still there. You got to look yourselves in the face as a coaching staff and say, dudes, that ain't happening again. What went wrong? You go internal, you diagnose it, and you fix it.
Yeah, and I think the easy argument would be, well, the Big 12 is not, or the Big 12 is deeper than the SEC, so therefore we have a better chance of finishing a little higher in the rankings. And we could have a longer conversation about whether that is true, because top 4, top 5, yeah, you probably give edge to Big 12, but when you get down to top 8, top 9, I think it's going to get pretty close. There's a lot of teams like 3 through 9 or 3 through 10 in the SEC that are all pretty bunched together, and that's where you need to be. Last year, 8 teams out of the SEC made the tournament. And of course, that was before Texas and Oklahoma joined the league. So you add Texas, that's 9 teams in the current SEC who made the tournament last year. Everybody was over 500 in conference play in the SEC, made the tournament. LSU was 9-9, and they missed it because they went 17-16 overall. Mississippi State was 8-10. That's the same record Oklahoma had in the Big 12, but Mississippi State made the tournament because they were 21-14 overall. Mississippi State and Oklahoma, fairly similar resumes last year, but Mississippi State, they were the better team. I feel very confident in saying that. I think it was somewhat close, but they finished the season stronger than Oklahoma, and I think that helped them. So now you look at this team coming into the SEC, and sure, they don't have to play some of the gauntlet teams like Baylor, and you don't have to play Kansas and Iowa State, but now they're going to go on the road. They're going to take on Auburn on the road. They're going to take on Florida on the road. They're going to take on Alabama on the road. Like, those are some really, really tough games.
John Calipari and Arkansas.
Yeah, they got to take on an Arkansas team that looks to be in a lot better shape. And we've seen most of Oklahoma's non-conference schedule come together. And I can't tell you just by looking at the 11 out of the 13 games that we see if they're going to be in the top 275 or not, like they weren't last year. They were just inside that marker, but they got some decent games. They got Michigan in the Jumpman. They got Oklahoma State like they typically do. They'll play Georgia Tech in the ACC SEC tournament. That'll be good. They're playing in Atlantis, which means they'll get, for their sake, hopefully they'll get some combination of Arizona or Gonzaga or Indiana or even Providence. They might get West Virginia, Louisville, Davidson. Those are the other teams that are in that group there. So we'll see if the schedule is going to be strong enough for them to go 9-9 or 8-10 or whatever in the SEC and still make the tournament. But this roster feels kind of similar to last year's, and this SEC feels somewhat similar to last year's Big 12. So I'm not sure I see the season playing out dramatically differently, even though it's a new look roster and a new conference. I think we're kind of going to see a lot of the same.
Yeah, Andy, I was trying to think about, we've got 16 teams in the SEC now. Where would OU finish if we divided it into thirds, which I know 16 doesn't divide evenly into thirds, but like top 6, middle 6, bottom 4. I frankly don't see them cracking that top 6. And I think, as you were saying earlier, I think that top 6 could go in a bunch of different directions, quite frankly, which is part of the transfer portal era we live in. I don't think they crater to the bottom 4. Like, you're going to have Vandy living down there. You're going to have some other schools. I would have them, I'm going to segment it even further, probably in the back half of the middle 6. Which would be like 10, 11, 12-ish. Does that feel about right to you?
Yeah, I was literally going to say 10 to 12 range is kind of where I project Oklahoma. And that's where the cutoff for how many teams in this conference are going to make the NCAA tournament feels like it's right around there. So I think we could be looking at another season for Oklahoma where they're sweating it out on Selection Sunday. And I think a part of the conversation, and we don't have a ton of time to dig into it now, although you and I did talk about this a little bit on Friday's show when we were talking about coaches on the hot seat. For the SEC, we talked about Dennis Gates, and I think that's the right choice. You go 0-18, you're going to be on the hot seat the next season. But I think both Porter Moser and Rodney Terry have some stuff that they're going to need to prove getting into the SEC. Terry's job is more secure than Moser, certainly more secure than Dennis Gates is. But how many more years can Porter Moser just missed the NCAA tournament before eventually Oklahoma says, hey, we need to make a move here. I think Porter Moser is a very good coach. I think he has navigated the portal in an intelligent way. I think he has brought in high-level talent, but you got to start making the big dance. And so I think that I would be surprised if Oklahoma only gave him 1 year in the SEC before making a move. But again, it depends how it goes. If they finish 12th or if they finish 15th, then yeah, maybe they make a move. But we're starting to get to the point where we're starting to have that question about Porter Moser, and it'll be interesting to see how this transition year goes for them.
I wonder, as that SEC money starts coming in, if they can do some things in NIL. Heck, if I'm Porter Moser, I'm trying to get like, hey, Blake Griffin, hey, Trey Young, hey, Buddy Hield, come be involved, be the face of this thing, make OU basketball sexy, and let's get some dudes. So, Andy, we'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting. Lots more of these schools to talk about throughout the offseason. For now, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for joining us to kick off a brand new week, a week that ends, by the way, with the opening ceremonies. I can't wait. Andy, folks, if you aren't subscribed to the show on audio or video, make sure to do that. Very easy. Helps make sure you don't miss a second of Locked On College Basketball. If you're not part of our Discord community that Andy talked about earlier, we'd love to have you come there as well. It's free to join. The link is in the show notes. Come for the college basketball, stay for the community, man. It's awesome. Apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until tomorrow, peace.